Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we continue to study your word. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Now, we're coming to a major change in the Gospel of Luke. This is a big transition. So what we looked at the first half, and first half is really establishes Jesus' ministry. And what are some of the things, and who he is his authority. And what are some of the things early on in the gospel that establish Jesus' authority? What does he do in the first half of the gospel?
Teaches.
Okay, he teaches, and his lessons are great. They're amazed because he teaches with authority. What else does he do? So teaches. Performs miracles. Geez. He's healing, and he's casting out demons, and he is tripping across the water, and he's stilling storms, and he's feeding 5,000. He's doing a lot of things. All of that, it seems like Luke is establishing who Jesus is as the Christ, which is who Jesus is, but not the total message of who Jesus is. And after he establishes his authority as the Christ, then the gospel kind of shifts, and Jesus sets his face to what city? Where does he start moving after the confession? The first part happens almost exclusively in Galilee, with a few exceptions. But Jesus' ministry has been in Galilee. What does he do after Peter says, "You are the Christ of God"? He heads to Jerusalem. And Luke uses that as a marker, like breaking in the little sections. He'll go back and say Jesus was on his way. Jesus was moving too. Okay, and as he's going to Jerusalem, right as he starts, he tells his disciples, "I'm not going to be here much longer." That's right after the confession. I'm not going to go. I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and they're going to betray me, and they're going to kill me, and then I'm going to be raised, and I'm going to go. Yes. So, right at the beginning, and as he goes to Jerusalem, it appears as though, as Luke structures his story, a little different than what Mark does, it seems like Jesus starts preparing the disciples for life after he's gone. Yeah. And if they're preparing disciples, he's preparing disciples, the message is really kind of going through them to us. Okay, because they
don't really get it.
That's exactly, Paula, that is exactly right. And that's when we can look at it and say, this is Luke structuring like a sermon, putting a message together about you. This is why it's a gospel. The message is not for the people living in the story. The message is to the people who are looking down on the story, the people who live later, indefinitely later. In Luke's church, but also us, and all the time between. So you're exactly right. They can't understand what's going on because they don't know he died, but we do. And so as he prepares them, he's showing us what we can be doing now. Since Luke also has a second volume, has Acts, we can see that the church does do what Jesus tells them to do in the book of Acts. That becomes the church's ministry. Okay, so he's preparing the church to do, and what are just a few of the areas that he prepares them? This is stuff you need to know after I'm gone. What are some of the things?
Life's not going to be easy.
Okay,
life is be loved.
Life is
going to be loved.
You're not going to be loved. Life isn't good. People aren't going to automatically accept your message, right? Really important teaching in Luke's church, because Luke's church is really kind of struggling a little bit. So, Jesus is saying you can't expect a lot of success. People aren't going to always treat you very well. What else does he tell them to sort of prepare them? What does he talk about to prepare? He talks about hypocrisy, And when he talks about hypocrisy, to what group does he point?
Pharisees.
the scribes and the Pharisees, which have become the enemy in this, the antagonist in this story. Okay, so watch out, hypocrisy is always there. Talks about wealth, how you handle your possessions, teaches them about prayer. A lot of messages, a lot of information about how you're supposed to live after Jesus is gone, which becomes a good message for the church. Last week, he's coming to the end, because at the beginning of what we looked at last week, he's almost to Jerusalem. He's in Jericho, right? And what happens in Jericho? Two little things that sort of transition us into Jerusalem. He encounters two people Zacchaeus and
Zacchaeus, or however you want to say it.
And Zacchaeus is what? Is a tax collector, wee little man. Wee little man was he. And he climbs up in a sycamore tree. Yeah. What about Zacchaeus was a tax collector, right? And by the end of the story, the little encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus, what is it Zacchaeus able to do?
Turn around.
Okay, he was able to turn around. He changes. He changes. Now, there was another guy right before it, also in Jericho. The blind man.
Yes.
What happened to the blind man?
He got healed.
He got healed. Same sort of thing. Both of them, both the blind man and Zacchaeus, are changed. And Jesus says to both, your faith has saved you, salvation has come to your house. So we've got, as he's getting ready to enter Jerusalem, we've got these two examples of people changing. Typical of Luke, blind can see, the tax collector is able to do what the rich ruler wasn't able to do. This is typical of Luke. The low are always lifted up, the high are always brought down. But we're right on the threshold. When we get to verse 28 of chapter 19, now we're moving again. What happens in verse 28, chapter 19?
He's going to Jerusalem.
He's going to Jerusalem. And I want you to notice, and this is just what writers would do. Notice how he begins that. After he said this. So Luke is tying Jesus' entry into Jerusalem with what just happened. By just saying after he said this. So we got this sort of continuity. He's pushing the story. So he's close to Jerusalem, right? Near at a place called the Mount of Olives. That's going to be important later. What does he do?
Tells his disciples.
Tells two disciples. What does he tell them?
Go into the village and get a colt that's tied there, and if the owner asks,
Unwritten colt.
tell him the Lord needs it.
Okay.
Wonder which two disciples he sent.
What does?
It doesn't say.
Yeah. Now that's interesting. Doesn't say, which means
Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. If it doesn't say, it doesn't matter.
I thought maybe you knew.
Yeah. That doesn't say. But what kind of, now colt refers to age. What kind of colt is it?
The donkey.
It's a donkey. Okay. It's the colt. It's a donkey. Now, what's interesting is why is even hold on that a little bit. So the colt is a donkey, and what's he going to do with that donkey?
He's going to ride it.
Okay, he's going to ride it. Now, getting this colt of a donkey, why is this significant?
Because they usually aren't ridden.
Okay,
like that.
you generally aren't ridden. What else?
It fulfills scripture. Right?
Yeah, it does. A prophecy in Zechariah, where it says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Okay, so this is in Zechariah. It's kind of interesting. So that's what Jesus is telling them to do in Luke. You got to get this colt. It's interesting when you read this in Matthew, because Matthew is really focused on fulfilling prophecy is all over the place. In Matthew says, because when you read from Zechariah, he says, your king is coming humble, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay? Now, as Luke reads it, as Mark reads it, it is, you're talking about a donkey, which is a colt, which is a foal of a donkey, right? That's not how Matthew reads it. Matthew reads it as two animals. There's a donkey and there's a foal of a donkey. And in Matthew, and this is where you can check on it later, in Matthew, this entry, it's not one animal that they bring him, but two. They bring him two animals. And what gets really bizarre is it says in Matthew, they put their coats on them, and Jesus got on them. So in Matthew, Jesus enters Jerusalem riding two animals. How he did that, don't know.
He was a stunt rider.
You know, I remember seeing circuses. You know, and that guy would have one foot on each one, right? But see, for Matthew, that's how he reads it. So if Jesus is fulfilling prophecy, that's what he's got to do. Of course, Luke doesn't, Mark doesn't. You know, they recognize that Zechariah is describing one animal, but using three different phrases, which isn't unusual. Okay, so this is what he's supposed to bring. This is what is significant. Also, it's a symbol of humility, right? Because that's when he's coming. As a king, but as a humble king. What happens?
Crowds form?
Well, when the disciples go to get him, get the animal,
Where are you taking it?
and he says,
Where are you loosening the colt?
and we need it just like Jesus said, brings it. This kind of tells us that not only does Jesus have insight, but this is all part of some kind of plan. This is part of a plan. Now, as he approaches, who's there?
Crowds.
Okay, what kind of crowds?
The old Pharisees.
Well, Pharisees hold that because it could be later.
Enthusiastic crowd.
You get a whole crowd. Who is it? How is it described? How does Luke describe the crowd?
And they threw their own coats.
Well, they do, but a little before that, who is throwing the coat? Cloaks.
They put the
They
cloaks on the
praise
donkey.
God joyfully, loud voice.
Who?
The whole multitude of disciples.
Ah! That's multitude of disciples. Now, if it's a multitude of disciples, we already know what a disciple is, right? What is a disciple?
Someone who follows.
Someone who follows Jesus, right? Someone's been called and follows Jesus. Now, this is a multitude of disciples. This is not a random crowd. These are disciples. Remember, we've talked about different groups of people. You know, one group are the scribes and the Pharisees. They are the enemy, right? Another group are disciples. They're the ones who are following. What's another group? We've talked about sinners and tax collectors. But what's the other group that's always kind of in the background?
Pharisees and the scribes.
Well, they're the enemy. There's another. So we got these Pharisees and the scribes. They're the enemy. We've got the disciples. They're the followers. Who else do we have? That's always been in the background.
The crowds.
We got the crowds that are in the background. And we don't know where the crowds stand. They're just there. They don't show any faith. Jesus doesn't explain parables to them. A lot of times he doesn't teach them stuff. He teaches disciples. But the crowd's always there. These aren't crowds shouting this. Now that's different if you look at the Gospel of Matthew. This is a little different. And certainly when you look at John, the entry. Luke has the people who greet him more like Mark. They are disciples who are meeting him. Not the whole city of Jerusalem like it says in Matthew. Okay? So they're followers, which means Luke is saying these are people who know who he is. They kind of made a commitment. And they're praising God. And why are they praising God?
Because he's a king.
Well, king, why have they chosen to do this? Luke tells us. Again, Matthew and Mark don't, but Luke does. Why are they doing this? What does it say in verse 37?
disciples
They're
are
praying, they're giving thanks.
For what?
All God has done.
All the mighty works that God has done.
Where was he seen?
So there's a reason for them to do it. And it's based on what they have seen, right? Therefore, it really has to be disciples. It just can't be random people that haven't seen him before. These are people who have followed him. So they're the ones who are in the first half where Jesus was doing these mighty acts. Okay? And what are they saying? Now, it's a multitude of the disciples praise. That should bring back some memories, because there was another story in Luke where there was a multitude praising. Do you remember the other story? It's found only in Luke, where you had a multitude, same words, a multitude praising God. And we're getting closer to it every single day.
Was it when, oh, no, I was trying to think it was,
Praising God, saying, glory to God in the highest,
oh,
and on earth peace with those whom God has. The birth story, we have a multitude praising God. We got a multitude praising God
oh.
here. So in a sense, Luke is telling us we've got, by just using the same word again, telling us that we're in something very similar, only instead of starting a ministry, we're ending this earthly ministry here. Same words. And what do they end up saying?
Hosanna.
Hosanna. What else? Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven. Glory. Okay. So they're saying that. Now, who is also there? Now, it's the multitude that's praying, multitude of disciples saying this, right? Who is observing?
The Pharisees.
The Pharisees. Now, they wouldn't be in this crowd, right? Praising. Because they're Pharisees, right? They aren't disciples. And what do they say to him?
Tell your followers or disciples to stop.
Tell your disciples. Not tell everybody, but tell your disciples to stop shouting. And how does Jesus respond?
This is a part I like.
What's that?
If you tell him to be quiet, the stones will start shouting.
The stones will start shouting. And this is something we've heard before. In Luke, we've heard before. Because in Luke chapter 3, when John the Baptist is talking to the Pharisees that are there, he says, don't claim that you're special because you come from Abraham, because God is able from these stones to raise children to Abraham. So this has also link in Habakkuk, the prophecy. Like I said, Luke
Told
is...
them to stop so that the stones actually would start.
Well, that's right.
That
That's
scared the crap out of them.
Yeah, well, but and that's what it says in it. This is again one of these subtle little things that Luke puts in that, and this isn't found in any of the other gospels. This is unique to Luke. He's fulfilling a prophecy. This is a prophecy in Hosea or Habakkuk that stones would shout when this king comes. Okay, so Jesus is in Jerusalem, right? What does he do in verse 41?
Temple.
Not yet. In 41.
He weeps.
Okay, he weeps over Jerusalem. Again, something unique. What does he say as he weeps? In a nutshell, what does he say? What's upset him so much?
You knew, especially in your day.
Yeah, what does he describe in what follows? He's sad about Jerusalem. What makes him so sad about Jerusalem?
Probably just thinking what's going to happen.
Well,
Peace is
Like
hidden
they're
from
going to
their
crush
eyes.
them. And
what does it say?
Peace is hidden from their eyes.
Okay, peace, which is, when you think about it, is a little irony, right? That peace is hidden from the eyes. What's the irony to say that peace is hidden from the eyes of Jerusalem? the name Jerusalem has the word peace in it. So it's a little, the city of peace has had peace hidden from them. What's the result? What does Jesus talk about is going to happen in Jerusalem?
I think he's talking about his crucifixion.
Well, what does he actually say? Could be, but what does he actually say? As you read it, what does it appear as though he's describing?
It's going to be overtaken.
Okay, Jerusalem's going to be overtaken. And?
Complete destruction.
Complete destruction. What does that sound like to you? If we take that and just look at it, what does it sound like to you?
Oh, Armageddon.
Sounds like the city's going to be destroyed, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying this. And Luke is writing this in about the year 90. And Jesus is somewhere around 30, between 30, 35. Saying that. Now understand, the city of Jerusalem is going to be destroyed in the year 70, 71. The Romans are going to destroy the city of Jerusalem because there's going to be a rebellion. You've heard of Masada, the fortress. The Jews are going to rebel, led by Sadducees because and Zealots are going to rebel against the Romans, try to reestablish a Jewish state. The Romans are going to send in the army, and sending in the army, you want to destroy the walls of the city because that's the problem. So they're going to destroy the city, and they're going to destroy the temple because the temple seems to be the focus of where this trouble is occurring. So Jesus is talking about this, but Luke is writing about it about 20 years after it happened. So as Luke writes his gospel, it's going to people who already know
It was destroyed.
that Jerusalem was destroyed. And so this becomes kind of a little subtle thing. I'm not sure it has to do with the future as much as the past. In other words, he's telling people, Luke is saying, Jesus knew it before it happened, but you're living on the other side of the destruction. So Jesus was right. Okay. So, but what's the problem? Why are they going to be destroyed? What is the reason? They're going to be destroyed.
They turned the temple from prayer.
Well, hold on
to
that.
prayer.
You're right, but we're not there yet. Because he hasn't gone to the temple when he says this. It says something about that things have been hidden from your eyes. What's going to
Do
happen?
not recognize the time of your visitation from God.
Yeah, what are they going to do? What is Jerusalem going to do that, looking back, you could say, that's the reason? What's going to happen in Jerusalem? Now, historically, it's because Jerusalem is going to rebel against the Romans. I mean, it's a civil war. They're fighting for freedom. Now, that's historically, but Jesus isn't talking about history here. What's going to happen in Jerusalem that people later might say, oh, that's the reason they were destroyed. It was destroyed.
They killed Jesus.
They killed Jesus. They rejected Jesus. They rejected and killed him. Okay, so we got this little thing about Jerusalem. Kind of cool because Luke is doing several things by including that little story. In other Gospels, he goes right to the temple. He talks about Jerusalem first, and then he goes to the temple, right? And when he gets to the temple, what does he say? What does he do?
They're having commerce in there.
Okay, they're having commerce. Now,
Starts
It's supposed to
throwing
be a
out.
temple.
okay, very good, Ed. That's
Flips the place upside down
Well-
and says, hey.
he drives them out. Now, we've heard the story of cleansing the temple, right?
Yeah.
We've heard it. It's in all four Gospels. As Luke writes it, just looking at what Luke wrote, what's missing? What would we expect to see in this story that Luke doesn't record? If you just looked up and said, and I asked, what happens in the temple? What does Jesus see in the temple? What does he see in the temple?
Gamblers.
Okay, he sees gambling. What does he see in the temple?
Animals.
Okay, good, outstanding,
It's like
animals.
selling, different things for sacrifices?
Yes, they're selling animals there, right? What else are they doing? He overturns the tables. Money changers, right? You got money changers and you got animals being driven out and you got all that stuff, and you see that in Matthew and you see it in Mark and you see it in John, but you don't see it in Luke. You don't see it in Luke. And if Luke used Mark as a guide, that means Luke is taking this out. Now, why would chasing out the animals and overturning the tables of the money changers, why is that really significant? How does that shape what he says at the end? Why is it so important that he chases out the animals and overturns the tables? Why do they need those animals in the temple?
Oh, to make the sacrifice.
To make the sacrifices.
Jesus to sacrifice.
After you needed to make the sacrifices, right? So you don't have animals. You can't. I mean, if you're going to take your little lamb and you've walked all the way to Jerusalem and you get to the temple and a priest looks at it and says, "I'm sorry, your lamb has a mole on its thigh. It can't be sacrificed." That's a real pain. So what the temple did was they sold approved animals there. So you didn't have to bring your animal with you. Well, what's that?
Kosher animals.
Yeah, well, yeah, unblemished. Animals that didn't have a blemish. You could buy there. So better to buy it there than to haul it from wherever you live. And the money used, and they used a lot of different kinds of money. Almost always, in fact, maybe always, had somebody's head on it.
Yeah.
Had somebody's head on it.
Caesars?
Maybe Caesars, maybe, because they were using money for, this was a lot of different countries sort of flowing. And remember, back then, the money actually had value. Our money doesn't have value. The value our money has is only what the government says it has value. Back then, it was made of gold and silver had value. I mean, you weighed it, and that determined the value of the coin. So it had innate value. But it had somebody's head on it. Now, why would that be a problem if you were buying something at the temple with a coin with somebody's head on it?
Kind of an idol.
Kind of an idol.
Thing.
You can't use it. And so if I want to sacrifice a goat. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to haul a goat, 100 miles. I'll buy the goat when I get there. But all the money I have in my pocket has a king's head on it.
So they have to get it changed.
I have to get it changed. I have to get it changed into money that doesn't have a head on it. I have to get it changed to temple money. Now, they're not cheating people because money has value because of weight. Not because of coinage. It's a different world. You don't have exchange rates. Money has value depending on this weight in the place where it's being weighed. That's what we use token money now. It's with species they use. So they don't cheat you because they're weighing it and giving you the weight just in a different kind of coin. Now, none of that, both of those things, though, are essential for temple worship, right? If Jesus chases out the animals and chases out the money changers, you can no longer worship at the temple. You can no longer do sacrifices, right? Luke takes all that out when he describes the temple. All he talks about is commerce, buying and selling. What point, if we looked at Matthew, Mark, and John, and looked at that story of cleansing the temple, and we'd say, well, Jesus is saying the Jewish worship is no longer valid. It's done. We've got a new, if we want to say new lamb, it's a new day, right? Things have changed. Maybe you can't say the same thing in Luke. Maybe the problem had to do with just commerce itself. Commerce itself. Luke wanted to take all that religious stuff out of the story and just focus on kind of a moral the moral aspect of commerce. Kind of interesting. I find that kind of interesting as you look at it and compare what's going on here. We got a different cleansing, a really different cleansing here. And what does he say? So all it says is he sort of gets them out, drives those who are selling out, and what does he say?
Well, it should be a place of worship.
Should be a place of worship, and you've turned it into a den of robbers. Okay, now what would be a den of robbers? Who would be in a den of robbers? Who would be in a den of robbers?
Pharisees.
Robbers. I mean, duh. That was a trick question. A den of robbers would. Now, if you got a whole bunch of robbers, right, in a den, are they robbing one another?
They could be.
But if you could. Is it likely that robbers are robbing one another?
No, water among thieves.
No, you wouldn't. So if you have a whole bunch of robbers together, they're not robbing one another because eventually all they do is pass money around. Because everybody, what would be a den of robbers if they're not robbing there?
The Pharisees and Sadducees.
Well, that's certainly who he's pointing it to. But what would a den of robbers look? What would it look like? What would be another name for a den of robbers?
Sinners.
Well, hey, let's think about it like a western. You ever watch westerns? Okay, like a western. Okay, you got robbers, right? And the robbers wear a mask, just like Ed you're wearing. And you go into a bank, right? And you do your robbing in banks, right? That's what you do. At stagecoaches, right? And after you rob, where do you go?
To your hideout.
You go to your hideout. And who might be at that hideout too?
Other thieves.
Other thieves. That's the den of robbers. Den of robbers is a hideout. It's not a place where you're actively robbing people. It's the place where that's right, and you feel like you're safe. And that's what Jesus is talking about with this temple. The temple has become a place where those who are
Robbing others.
are going for safety, are going for protection. Okay? Little bit different. He's not criticizing the practices there. He's really criticizing the people. And they're using the temple as a place to hide out. And that's not what the temple was intended to be. Now, he's doing this, he's clearing it out, right? And we said he's not clearing it, this isn't a judgment about Jewish worship. If you look at the other God, if you look at Matthew and Mark, there's a story that surrounds the cleansing of the temple. And it's a story of a fig tree. And when Jesus is going into the town, going in Jerusalem, in Mark, he goes in and then leaves and then comes back. When he's going to Jerusalem, he sees a fig tree and it's bearing no figs. And what does Jesus do you remember what he does to the fig tree? He curses it. Curses it. Bang.
Is that the dogwood?
Well, it's this fig tree. He's not bearing any figs. And he says, that fig tree is cursed. And when they leave the city, what do they see? The fig tree withered. The fig tree is withered. Makes sense if he's talking about Jewish worship. Cleansing the temple, you can't worship, things have changed. That's what's happened to Jewish worship. Luke doesn't include that story around the temple, cleansing of the temple. Nothing about a fig tree. In fact, he's taken that story and moved it earlier and turned it into a parable that we looked at. Remember the gardener, the owner says cut it down, and the gardener says, give it another year and I'll, fertilize it, and if it doesn't bear in another year, then you can cut it down, but until then I'll take care of it. So he's taken that fig tree that the other gospels use around the cleansing of the temple, and he's moved it. So he's kind of he's taken that meaning away from the temple. That's not what this story is about. It's not about the fall of Jewish worship, because as soon as this happens, what does Jesus start doing?
Starts teaching.
He starts teaching,
Teaching
right?
every day
He starts teaching, and where does he start teaching?
in the temple.
He starts teaching in the temple. So this cleansing of the temple is preparing it for him to teach, right? That's why the temple needs to be cleansed, because that's where he's going to be teaching, right? And who shows up as he's teaching?
Pharisees.
Okay, Pharisees and scribes. Okay, and leaders of the people. And just in case we forgot about who these guys are, what does Luke tell us?
They're looking for
They're
any
looking-
way they can to kill him.
They're looking to
They
kill him.
Find anything, because, and the people were starstruck or.
Oh,
I forget
they're
what the word was.
dazzled, spellbound by what he's saying.
Spellbound.
So but these guys are bad guys, right? Now, before they say anything else, we know that anything that comes out of their mouth is
It's a setup.
a setup, is bad. If we were in a movie and they show up, we do what?
Run.
Yeah, or run. All right.
I'd run.
So there they are, show up, they're looking to trap him, they ask him a question. We know the motivation of the question is not for an answer. Is that your mom?
Oh, she's dying and no one will come see her. What do you mean you can't come to see me tomorrow night because you have tickets for the theater? It's more important than me. Oh my God. I'm gonna have a nervous breakdown over her.
She's still in Pittsburgh.
She's still in Pittsburgh. So I've just been out there arguing with her as and all she wants is grace. And a pastor, they won't send her a pastor to go talk to her. She's too mean to die. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt everybody.
No,
No.
in fact, let's have a little prayer. Let's pray. Lord God, Donna's under a lot of pressure. Velma's, she's certainly ailing, and she's scared and tired and just irritable, difficult to get along with right now. And she's kind of chosen to direct a lot of it towards her daughter. And that's not fair, but that's what's happening. So, Lord, we're going to ask that you give Donna strength and patience. Remind her that regardless of what anybody says, she's in your hands and her mom's in your hands. And you can take care of both of them far better than any human being on earth. Remind her of that they are living in your care, surrounded by your love. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so we got elders showing up, right? And they ask a question. What's the question they ask? Oh, they're going to ask some good questions.
Yeah, something about John the Baptist.
Yeah, well, they ask to Jesus. They ask, and this is a trapping question, right? We're right at the beginning of chapter 20. Okay. What authority do you have to do the things you do? Now, why is that a good question? Why is that a tricky question for Jesus? Why is that dangerous? Because they just say, tell us by what authority you're doing these things. Who gave you this authority?
Because if he says God.
If he says God, then what? What's the problem if he says, I'm doing this by the authority of God?
And that he thinks he's better than
Yeah, boy. God told me to do this. Paula, can you argue with me? If I tell you God told me to do this?
I probably wouldn't argue with
You
but
wouldn't
I'd look
argue with
at-
me.
I'd look at you like maybe, did he really? I'd be thinking it, I wouldn't say it out loud.
Yeah, you might be thinking I'm kind of got my toes on the line, claiming God's authority. So Jesus, and if he says I don't have any authority, then why are you doing it? If he says God's given me authority, he's speaking for God. This is a no-win situation. Either way, he's in trouble. So what does Jesus do?
He asked them a question.
He asks them a question, and what question does he ask them? Now he talks about John the Baptist. And he says, yeah. Let's talk, if you want to talk about authority, did John have authority from God or from people? And now the scribes and Pharisees have a problem. And what's their problem? Because see, Jesus has already called them what? Hypocrites. Their problem, they don't want an answer. They don't want to get information from Jesus. They're hypocrites. And so what do they start thinking?
They start discussing to try to figure out how they can trick him even more.
Well, and now they're kind of trapped, right? Mm-hmm. Because if he says, who had John the Baptist, what was his authority? And if they say heaven, then Jesus is going to come back and say, yeah, why didn't you follow him? If the Pharisees say John's authority came from heaven, then Jesus is going to say, that's interesting you say that. Why didn't you listen to him? But if he says, oh, John's authority came from people. He didn't have authority from heaven. Who's he speaking to? A bunch of people that think John's authority did come from heaven. And what are they going to do to those scribes and Pharisees? Yeah, they're going to be on them like white on rice. So they are in big trouble. Either way they answer, they're going to have a problem. So what do?
The middle road.
Yeah, what's the middle road?
They didn't know.
They didn't answer. Yeah, they said they didn't know, and which is kind of ironic because they really don't know. Because they don't know that Jesus came from God. So in a sense, they did it for political reasons, but they really don't know. And so what does Jesus say to them? Yeah, if you can't answer my question, I'm sure not going to answer yours. But we know the Pharisees, more about the Pharisees. They just don't know. And this leads Jesus to tell a parable. And in a nutshell, just briefly, what happens in that parable? Which we all know is about those Pharisees who refused to answer. What's the parable?
About the vineyard.
About the vineyard. Vineyard's built. Owner goes out of town, right? Leaves the vineyard for
the servants.
For servants, right?
Care of.
To take care of. Well, to do more than take care of. What are the servants? Yeah, they're like sharecroppers, right? Because that's kind of what they are. So he's built this vineyard, gives it to, and vineyard is a heavy, symbolic. Now, Luke has cut down a lot of the verbiage that we see in Mark. Because he's got him building towers and presses and all kinds of stuff in Mark. Luke is kind of scaled down. So he builds and leases it to tenants. But it's not their vineyard, is it? Right? So what happens after harvest?
He sends somebody to collect what?
Yeah, to collect his share. I mean, that's the lease terms. That's what a sharecropper. You get to, this is my land, you can work it, you got to pay me a share, right? And that's what the owner says to the tenants. Now, what do the tenants assume? Which is what do they end up doing? So the master sends slaves to collect his share from the tenants. What do the tenants do?
They beat him up.
They beat him up.
Back, huh?
They beat him up and send him on their way. And he keeps on sending them, and they beat him up every time. Now, what does the master, the owner, what conclusion does he come to?
I'll send my son.
I'll send my son. Because if I send my son, they'll respect me.
Maybe they'll recognize him as I have some authority to collect.
Right. That's right. Okay, so I've got authority to collect. What do the tenants, they make an interesting assumption. What do they assume?
He's dead.
If they make the assumption that if they somehow kill the son, then Yeah, then the farm belongs to them. If they kill the son, somehow the vineyard belongs to them. Now, does that assumption make any sense? No sense. 0 sense. You know, it's like if you're renting a house and the guy comes to collect the rent. If you say, ooh, I'm going to shoot him on the porch and then it'll be my house. That's a pretty stupid thing to do, right?
There's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people in jail. Has anybody ever gotten away with it? Do you think anybody has ever gotten away?
Some people might.
Yeah, they may try, but I doubt that many people would get away
Well,
with
just
it.
from law, you know, let's say even the landlord didn't have a will, it would still go to their next of kin.
It ain't going to go to them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's no way they are going to get it, right? And the owner's still alive. So they're trying to get an inheritance that the son hasn't even collected yet. It doesn't make sense, right? Therefore, there's no surprise when they kill him, right? They kill the son. What does the owner do?
Also destroys them
Destroys him and gives the vineyard
to others.
Sells it in.
to somebody else. You know, they gives the vineyard. Now, what is the response to this parable? How do they respond?
Heaven forbid.
Oh, heaven forbid that this would happen. And he looks at him and he says what?
The stone which was rejected is now the
What does
cornerstone.
this text mean?
Okay. What does that, the thing about the stone, how does that relate to the parable? Because he's using 2 images. We've got 2 different metaphors going on here, right? Because we got one of them with this vineyard and the other one with the stone. How do we bring them together? How do those 2 come together?
The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone.
Jesus is the stone.
Jesus is the son. Or the son,
And
you know.
Jesus is the son.
Right,
And
is the, so we've got Jesus playing 2 roles.
Uh-huh.
You know, the son that they kill, which is pointing towards crucifixion this coming. Laying the blame on the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Because that's what and they're doing it from a lack of knowledge. They don't even understand just basic things. Like you don't get an inheritance when the guy is still alive. You don't inherit his farm even if it worked. You can't get it because he's still breathing. You know, you're not going to get it. It's ridiculous. They're also going to reject it. And Luke tells us that they know, Luke, in case we didn't get that this parable and this other metaphor about this rejecting the stone is about the scribes and the Pharisees, the enemy, Luke tells us what? They realized the parable was against them. Okay, so we know, just in case as we read it, now who is he talking about? Is he talking about us? No, he's not talking about us. He's talking about the scribes and the Pharisees and their attitude. Okay, tells us about their character. So they are going to be, Jesus has already talked about, they're going to be replaced, right? In this vineyard. And the vineyard is an Old Testament symbol of God's prosperity and stuff. Okay. Now, next encounter. What do we got going on in verse 20? We got the same sort of thing, right? They're looking to trap him. So we got a new little story because he's got an introduction, just like we saw before. Only this time, what are they looking to do to him? They're looking to trap him, but what are they going to use to trap him this time?
Plants.
They're going to use,
Man, bride. So-
well, in verse 20, what does it say in verse 20? What do they want to do
So
with
they watched
Jesus?
him and
They want to turn him over to the
set a
Roman
spot.
government.
They want to turn him over to the Roman authorities, which means the trap this time is going to have to be
Against Rome.
against Rome. I mean, The Romans don't care about whether Jesus claims authority from God or something. They don't care. Who cares? The Romans, as long as you pay your taxes, Romans are happy with you, right? So they're going to have a reason to turn him over to Roman authority and let them deal with it. And so, of course, the question they ask is politically loaded, right? Because they ask him what?
Do we pay taxes to
Oh
Caesar?
my goodness gracious, should you pay taxes or not to Caesar? Wow. That's a dangerous question. Because what makes that question dangerous?
Well, if he says something against Rome, they're gonna come for him.
If he says something against Rome, the Romans are going to come from him. Well, then why doesn't he just, if he says, well, yeah, absolutely, you need to pay your taxes. What's the problem there?
It isn't time yet.
They'll attack him from the other
Yeah,
direction.
do you think, I think probably we could say that no one in the history of the world has ever enjoyed paying taxes. Especially to the Romans. It is not, that's why, nowadays, that's why politicians will do anything to avoid saying, we could solve this problem if. They're not going to say it because if they say that, what's going to happen to them? There won't be politicians much longer. People don't like to pay taxes. People just don't like it. They didn't like it then, we don't like it now. So Jesus is in a tough situation. What does he do?
Whose face is on the coin?
He says, yeah, give me a coin.
Yeah.
And which he's looking at a Roman coin, right? And what does he say?
Caesar's. Give Caesar what is
Yeah.
Caesar's and God to God what is
This
God's.
is engraved with Caesar's face. Therefore it must belong to Caesar. Give to God what belongs to God. Well, who is carrying that image? If that coin carries Caesar's image, therefore give it to him. It belongs to him. Who's carrying the image of God?
His people.
We are. We are. So taxes belong to Caesar. We belong to God. Okay. They are amazed by his answer because they don't trap him. Who shows up then? So we got the Pharisees receding into the background. Sadducees. We hadn't seen Sadducees at all, right?
What's the difference?
Sadducees, Sadducees come from a Hebrew word, zadok. That's the Hebrew word from which we get Sadducees. And the word zadok means righteous. So the Pharisees were considered the righteous ones. Pharisees followed law. Sadducees were righteous because they hung around the temple. Their focus was on the temple, particularly temple worship, sacrifice. The Sadducees also only followed the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. They were aware of the prophets. They thought the prophets, what they wrote were fine, but they weren't guided by the prophets. They were guided by the first 4 books. Now, if you look at the first 4 books, there's nothing in the first 4 books of the Bible that talk about life after death. So the Sadducees didn't believe that there was life, that there was any future life. No life after death. When you died, you were dead. And the only life you experienced was in the memory of the people who cared for you. That's how you lived afterwards. But there was no consciousness after death. So once you were dead, you were dead. So the Sadducees asked him a question. Now the Pharisees, on the other hand, did believe in life after death. So this wouldn't have been a Pharisee question, but it is a Sadducee. What question do they ask? This is really a wise guy question. This is like, can God create a rock too big for God to move? This is a pain in the neck question. What do they ask Jesus?
The one about the brother
Oh, yeah.
dying and
Yeah.
the other brothers marrying.
Well, and because we see this in the Old Testament, the story of Tamar. If a woman's married to the older brother and that older brother dies, then without children, then she can marry the next brother in line.
And what if there's children?
Well, if there's children, it's a whole different situation. The reason for that is the woman needs children to support herself. But the whatever is produced from that wedding is considered the child of the brother who died. So
Now, if the younger brother's also married, if he's already married, he can still.
no, yeah, he doesn't have to divorce his wife.
He can still marry the other one, or he doesn't?
Well, no, the deal is off.
Okay.
It's only if you have single,
Okay.
the brother of the other brothers.
Married younger brother.
What's that?
An unmarried younger brother.
Yeah, an unmarried younger brother. But if it's the younger brother's unmarried, then there's an obligation. Like I said, if you look in Genesis of the story of Tamar, that's what happened to Judah's sons. They married, and so if you're married, I'm married to Debbie. Debbie, I die. If Debbie didn't have children, my brother is single. He would be obligated to marry her, and whatever children would be produced would be in my name, would be my heirs. Okay, so that's the deal. And being an older son, I would get more of my father's inheritance. Now, in this way, that's just cultural law. These wise guys, what do they ask?
Who's she going to be married to?
Yeah, who's she going to be married? She's run through all the brothers. You say there's a resurrection from the dead. Now, you also need to be aware that the Jews didn't believe in a sort of a spiritual heaven where you died and your soul went to be with that. Jews didn't believe that. Jesus didn't believe it. Paul didn't believe it. They believed in the resurrection of the dead. There would be a time when the dead would rise, because the Jews didn't believe you could separate soul from body. Neither one could have an independent existence. All souls had to have bodies to live. All bodies needed souls. So there are no zombies. Jews didn't believe in zombies, soulless bodies. Nor did they believe in ghosts, souls floating around. So you had to have the two. That's why they believed in the resurrection of the dead. And so at the time of the resurrection, boom, everybody is raised, right? Bango, this woman is raised. Her husbands are raised.
There you have it.
Yes. Do you have a nice little cozy house with all the husbands around her? Well, that's crazy. What does Jesus say to them?
You're not married to heaven.
Yeah, what's that?
You're not married to heaven.
You got no clue. Guys, you got no clue. You're assuming the things after the resurrection of the dead are the same as they were before. You don't have a clue. I think if it was written now, he'd probably say, "Oh, you're stupid. Are you really stupid? You really think the world in the future, this perfect world that God, into which we're going to be raised, is like the imperfect world in which we live now? Give me a break." Now, evidently it was harsh enough, his response was harsh enough that they received, right? And in fact, to prove, though, that the resurrection of the dead is true, Jesus uses an interesting, because like I said, they don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, but Jesus seems to, because in verse 37, what does he say?
About Moses.
Yeah, let me prove to you that the resurrection is going to happen. And what's this deal about Moses?
Burning bush passage.
Mm-hmm. And in the voice from the bush does what?
The dead are raised.
Yeah, well, he talks, the voice from the bush speaks of the Lord of
God,
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, is the Lord God of the living or the dead? If there's no resurrection, right, then is Abraham dead? No future life? If there's no resurrection, is Abraham dead with no future life? Yeah. If there's no resurrection of the dead, is Isaac dead with no future life? Yeah. Is Jacob? Yeah. Then God must be, if God from the burning bush says, "I am the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," then the Lord is the God of dead people, right? No, 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 no. We believe God is the God of life, of living people. Therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob must have some kind of life or future life. Therefore, there's got to be a resurrection, or God is a God of death. That's the logic behind it. They are amazed, right? And nobody says anything, right? They stop. But Jesus sort of takes the offensive. And what does Jesus say? Because in verse 41, Jesus takes the offensive.
Oh, why do they say good answer? I
What's that?
was hung up on them saying they say good answer.
Yeah, they said he has spoken well.
Right. Because
They ask him
now
questions.
who says he spoke well?
The Sadducees, or no,
Not the Sadducees,
the scribes.
the scribes. And the scribes believed in the resurrection. Right? The scribes believed in, so they thought, they were congratulating Jesus because their rivals, the Sadducees, Jesus had put them in their place. Right? But he answers so well to both the Pharisees and the scribes. Are people asking him questions? No, but Jesus does. And what does Jesus ask? And there's a logic behind it, but it's not necessarily clear.
How can they say that the Messiah is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make you enemies.
What is he saying? How does that? What is Jesus doing?
He's starting to proclaim who he is.
Well, he is, and he's undermining their expectations because he's saying, you say the Messiah is going to be the son of David, right? That's what the scribes are saying. Messiah is going to be the son of David. But according to David, what does David call the Messiah? Lord. Well, is that what a father says to his son? Does a father look at his son and say, "Oh Lord"?
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, not here. But that's the logic. No father's going to say that to a son. Fathers don't do that to sons, which shows that, using his logic, the Messiah can't be the biological son of David. Can't be the biological son of David. So undermining their expectations really fast. Turns in verse 45, and what does he start doing in 35?
35 or 40.
45.
Denounces the scribe.
Okay, he's talking. He's talking to who? He says people are there, but who does he speak to?
The crowds.
At 45, does he say he said this to the crowds?
In the hearing of all the people.
He said
to the disciples.
to the disciples. So we pick up and start listening, right? Because this message is for us. What does he say in that message?
Weary of the scribes because they like to walk around in long robes and love to be greeted.
Beware of the
Respect
scribe.
in the marketplace. Da, 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 da.
So what is he suggesting about the scribes?
They're not to be trusted.
They're not to be trusted. What do the scribes like?
Show off.
They like to show off. Now he's already called them what? Earlier. Already called them hypocrites.
Yeah.
So these guys that have been trying to trap him, they're just in it for show. And what does he say is going to be the result to them?
Be punished.
They're going to be punished. Going to Luke's church. Luke's church is being persecuted, right? Not by the Romans. Who's putting pressure on Luke's church? The Jews. What kind of Jews? Ain't Sadducees. The temple's gone. Who's putting pressure on them?
Pharisees.
The only Jews left are the Pharisees. And what he has called them, he's called them hypocrites. He's calling them show-offs, and he's saying they're going to be, their condemnation is sure. How is that going to resonate in Luke's little bitty church? Well,
Well,
hopefully,
in his
yeah,
church,
in his
yes,
church is going to
I love
resonate
that.
well. You know, the guys that are dumping on you, God's going to dump on eventually. Again, really, what do we got going on with Jerusalem? Verse 20. Now remember, the temple's going to be destroyed. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed in 70. What's happening? What does he talk about beginning in verse 20?
Jerusalem surrounded by the destruction.
It's going to be, but remember, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, but this is supposed to take place in between 30 and 35, and when was Jerusalem destroyed?
70.
Yeah, 70. It was happening, and when was this written? 90. So it's being written 20 years after the destruction. Okay, so the people who are reading and know all about the destruction, right? Sort of like the Book of Mormon that talks about Jesus coming to America. Of course, it was written in 1843. Pretty easy to say Jesus discovered America. Back 1,000 years before. Okay, so Jesus. So what's going to happen to Jerusalem?
Surrounded by armies.
Going to be surrounded. What else is going to happen?
It's destruction.
People are going to flee. What else? Destruction. What else? Going to be trampled on. How long is it going to be trampled on?
I guess 40.
Well, how much? What does he say?
Days of punishment. Those were the
Going to be trampled on. Who's going to trample on it? Ain't going to be Jews.
until their time is up.
What? Whose time?
And the heathen will trample over Jerusalem until their time is up.
The Gentiles are going to trample Jerusalem until their time is up. Okay? So what's going to happen to Jerusalem? Going to be destroyed by who? By the Gentiles. Who are Gentiles? Who are the Gentiles that are hanging out in Jerusalem? Romans. That's exactly what we're talking about. But this isn't the end, right? Because what's going to happen later?
There's going to be all kinds of signs.
There's going to be all kinds, and these are apocalyptic signs. These are it's typical. Anytime you see sun, turning black and moons becoming red, these are apocalyptic signs, apocalyptic style. It's written. We don't use it anymore. Highly symbolic. A lot of colorful language. All of this, and when this happens, this is sort of end of the world stuff. What do? What should you do? You look up, right? And who's coming?
Son of Man.
Son of Man, how's he coming?
Oh, bright clouds.
Coming in a cloud. Now
Great
understand,
glory.
English is, we got cloud, which is a separate word. In Hebrew, the word for cloud is kavod. And kavod is the same word, not commode, but kavod. And that's the same word that's translated glory. So that's why in the Old Testament you see clouds. Even on Transfiguration, when they were surrounded by a cloud. Cloud in Hebrew is glory. So it's a symbol of a sign of God's glory. So in other words, he's coming in a cloud. It's not to be taken literally. He's coming in glory, with God's glory. That's why he would use that image. Okay? And what parable does he offer? This is a little bit of the end of the world.
Fig tree.
And then he gives a parable of a fig tree. And what does he say about a fig tree? How does that parable of the fig tree relate to this end that's coming?
When the leaves appear, it's summer.
Right.
And I guess by the way, when the leaves are falling, it's
Well, there are sprouts on the tree, Now, Jesus, this is what's being said. Jesus is saying this in the temple, right? Kind of concluding this temple. That the time is going to come when Son of Man returns. And when the Son of Man returns, what occurs when the Son of Man returns? What's the expectation?
justice.
Well, justice is going to be what else? What's going to happen? Boom! Immediately when the Son of Man comes. Huh? One event, absolutely crucial for the Jews. Absolutely crucial. When God, the glory of God returns, what's going to occur?
Oh, it's going over there.
Will the temple be restored?
The Temple Mount building.
One event is going to happen. Key event. More important than the Temple Mount. More important than one event that's going to occur. And to the Jews, particularly the scribes and the Pharisees, this is, and for Jesus and Peter, Paul, this is absolutely crucial. What's going to happen when the Son of Man returns? Makes all the difference. Without it, nothing matters.
Heaven and earth shall pass
The-
away, but my words will not.
This is the only hope. This is the only hope the Jews have. The only hope Paul had when he wrote the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Something's going to happen when the Son of Man returns. Resurrection of the dead. Bang! Resurrection of the dead. That's it. The dead are raised. That's it. Now, like I said, the Jews don't believe. They don't believe that when you die, your soul goes someplace else and has an independent existence. They don't believe that. So the Jews don't believe when you die, you go to heaven. That's not what the Jews believe. You would never hear a Jew say the body is a shell, that when it dies, the soul is released. That's Greek Platonic philosophy. I mean, that's what the Greeks believed, that body and soul are separate. That's Plato. That's what he taught. Jews did not believe that. That's why the resurrection of the dead is so crucially important. Because without the resurrection of the dead, you stay
In your body.
dead. You stay dead. That's what the Jews believed. That's what Paul believed. That's the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians is all about the resurrection of the dead. That's what they believed. So that's why the resurrection of Jesus is going to be so important to the Jews. The Jews. Because it marks the beginning of something new. If the Jews believe souls transcended bodies, you don't need a resurrection. That becomes just a great miracle. But it's not a huge deal, because if he wasn't raised, his soul would have gone someplace else. But for them, souls don't go anywhere. They go to a place called Sheol, like Hades, place of shadows, until they are raised with their bodies into a new existence in the resurrection. That's Revelation. That's the 20th and 21st chapter of Revelation. This resurrection of the dead. That's what he's talking about here. That becomes a source of hope. And to a church that is facing intense persecution, this becomes a tremendous source of hope, right? Because the time is coming and you can count on it. Unfortunately, one of the things that, as we become more influenced by Greek, the resurrection becomes hard to grasp. I mean, resurrection of Jesus is a miracle, right? Great miracle. But for the Jews, it's more than a great miracle. It's the beginning of a new age, because it's the age of resurrection. And that's why Paul will say, Jesus was the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Like Jesus was raised, so will we. And that's what he taught. So you kind of have to get a Jewish mindset to understand the significance of the resurrection. Okay, teaching in the temple. What happens? He's done with the temple, right? And people would get up early to go see him at the Mount of Olives. Okay. So Jesus' conversation at the temple, teachings of the temple are done. What has Jesus shown, demonstrated by what he taught at the temple? What has he demonstrated?
But he knows what he's
He
talking
knows
about.
what he's talking about, right? And who doesn't know what they're talking about?
The Pharisees.
The scribes don't know what they're talking about. The Pharisees don't know what they're talking about. The Sadducees don't know what they're talking about. And what little glimmer of hope does he offer, particularly to a church later, having seen the destruction. I mean, Luke's church knows that Jerusalem was destroyed. The people that he's talking to here, they're on the other side. You know, they haven't seen the destruction. Luke's church has, and they're facing persecution. What glimmer of hope does Jesus hold out for them?
They can change.
They can change, and what else is going to change? They can change. Why can they change? What can they believe?
That we made whole.
That we're going to be made whole. That the times are turning. The leaves are starting to sprout. You know, hold on. Hold on. Doesn't mean the figs are setting, but the leaves are starting to sprout. Therefore, hold on. You know, keep on. Okay. When we talk next week, we're going to look at just chapter 22. We're going to start looking at the passion, because the teaching in the temple is done. Now we're going to start dealing with, you know, the meal and the passion that gets going. And as Luke describes, it's going to be different than the others. A little bit different. Because a guy's going to show up that's not in the other Gospels. That plays a role in the passion of Luke. Okay. Any questions? A lot of stuff. Just hang in there. You know, a lot of stuff. Just hang in there. But I'm giving you, you know, I don't want to dumb it down, because I don't think that helps any. That doesn't help. So just hang in there. And if you got questions, don't hesitate to ask. Okay. Lord God, thank you so much for guiding us through this. Remind us that regardless of what's happening in the details that are going on, remind us that you're in control, and that you love us, and that the time is going to come when we are going to be raised to a new life. And that becomes our source of hope. Help us to trust that. Help us to see that. Help us to claim that and allow that to shape the way we live now. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. I thank you.